Hey guys, what's going on? Welcome back to another AP Sports video. Obviously today there's massive news in the NBA, really big trades. James Harden ended up going to the Nets. That's what I'm going to be getting into today. So if you're interested in any of those teams that were involved in the trade, I'm giving my opinion on all of them this video, so make sure to listen to the whole thing. So earlier today the Rockets and Nets were the two, I guess, main trading partners. And so the Rockets ended at the end of the day with Victor Oladipo, Dante Exum, Rodions Kurucs, 3 Brooklyn first-round picks, 1 Milwaukee first-round pick, and 4 Brooklyn first-round pick swaps. Now, I'm going to put all of this up on screen, but if you're just listening, that's what the Rockets got. And then you go down to the Nets. All the Nets got was James Harden, of course. A player of his magnitude would require that much. That's obviously why I gave it up, and that's also why the Sixers were pursuing him. It's neither here nor there whether I think they should have traded with the Sixers. I totally understand why they made this move instead of the other one, and I'll get into that later. The Pacers, in this trade, they traded Victor Oladipo to the Rockets. They received Caris LeVert and a second-round pick for Oladipo, and the Cleveland Cavaliers received Jarrett Allen and Taurean Prince for that Milwaukee first-round pick that went to Houston. So the Brooklyn Nets, so they obviously got James Harden. That obviously he's going to help your offense. I don't think that there's any doubt that he's an incredible scorer, and he's also shown he's a very good playmaker, especially this season, being with new players and stuff. He's been able to have crazy assist numbers, and even in previous seasons he has. He actually played point guard in Houston for a little bit. I think that this is going to help a lot with Spencer Dinwiddie going down. He was in the starting lineup for the Nets, and he was the primary playmaker for them. As good as Kyrie Irving is, I don't necessarily know how good of a passer he is. He can be a little ball dominant at times, which is okay when you're that good of a scorer, don't get me wrong. But I think James Harden will be in a little bit more of a passive role, obviously, and will be asked to kind of lead the team more with assists. So, I mean, the Nets, I think it's hard for me to say if they won this or not. I'll get into that at the end of the video. But the one advantage of James Harden is it's not like he's an awful post defender. I know I mentioned they gave up Jarrett Allen, who's a very, very good center. And they also gave up Caris LeVert at guard. But I think James Harden's actually a decent post defender and a decent defender overall. I know he gets a lot of hate for that, but I feel like on a team where he's going to have less offensive responsibilities, he might be able to pick it up on that end because he is really big and physical. And another reason the Nets make this trade, well, there are 2 other reasons really, but this trade could potentially, woo Kyrie Irving back in one way or another. Now, it could also put him away further because he's not always been the biggest with stars, but I mean, winning a championship is a massive thing. I mean, that's why these players play. And maybe he thinks he's won one before and he's just done with it after that. I don't know what he's doing right now. I don't think anyone really knows. He's obviously a really big part of this trade, but maybe that's another reason the Nets did this. Maybe they brought James Harden on because they don't have Kyrie Irving. They're unsure of what's going to happen. Supposedly, he wasn't as involved as he wanted to be in the Steve Nash hiring. And there have been a couple other situations in particular, especially last season, and it's kind of come up again this year. DeAndre Jordan ended up being on the bench. He was a DNP recently, so did not play by coach's decision because of Jarrett Allen. And so now he's gone. Maybe they're trying to appease him in that way by starting DeAndre Jordan now. Another reason is Kevin Durant. He has the exact same contract as James Harden. They have the 2 years from now, so they have the next 2 seasons plus a player option in that 3rd year. And so with him and Harden having the same thing, they either get both of them off the books and have a ton of cap space at the exact same time, or both of them will commit a couple more years and you have 2 all-star guys still on the team. Kyrie Irving is actually locked up to that 3rd year. He doesn't have that option. So that's, of course, depending on whether or not he retires or requests trade, whatever he's doing right now. And obviously, they give up basically 4 seasons of their own first-round pick and then 4 seasons of pick swaps. So that's pretty atrocious. And they're going to have 4 seasons basically there because if Harden And if Harden and Kevin Durant leave on that player option, they have 4 seasons where they're just getting absolutely obliterated on these draft picks. They don't have a single one. And that's not the way to build a team, but I think one reason you can be satisfied if that does happen, if you're a Nets fan, this Nets management basically did the exact same thing when they traded for Paul Pierce and Kevin Garnett. I realize they gave up lots of incredible picks with that, but the silver lining is once they brought in new management, they were able to acquire D'Angelo Russell along with a bad contract, obviously, in Timofey Mozgov. So with Kevin Durant and James Harden being off the books for those next couple seasons, I think they could do a similar thing, basically absorbing a big contract and getting a young talent. So although they have to take on that contract, they still have the opportunity to get young talent. And it's not like Brooklyn's going to be an unpopular place to go in free agency. I mean, Brooklyn obviously is a massive market, so that's going to help a lot. And so it's just weird, though, because all the picks are unprotected, so they in no way get these picks back. But they lost, at the same time, young assets that they had right now. They lost Jarrett Allen, who is a very good young center and was the best defensive player on this team. He was basically their defensive anchor, at least in the however many games they've played. And then you also have Karis LeVert, who wasn't necessarily a great defender, but an incredible scorer, and he was only 26 years old. And I personally think that his development, it hasn't even been in full swing yet. He hasn't had a consistent role his entire career. So I think if he had been given a role on this team, he could have really developed. He's just had so many different changes throughout his career. He's only 26 and he's on a good contract. So I don't see the harm in keeping him there, obviously, and not making this trade, because Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant's still massive, and you have Jarrett Allen defensively, and you have Karis LeVert off the bench. I still do think they get better, but it's hard to justify giving up your 2 future basically building blocks at this point that are both very good on opposite sides of the ball, and you trade away 8 draft picks for when these guys that are young right now would be in their prime. So you're basically just throwing 4 years out the window, depending on, of course, whether or not they can trade for young talent, which is going to be really tough. So another thing, I guess, this is one reason that I think the Nets did a very good job in this trade, is they're over to somehow get a better package than the Sixers. I don't know how Ben Simmons isn't a massive, massive deal for the Rockets. I honestly, any trade with Ben Simmons would have been better than what I think they got, although this is still incredible, because Ben Simmons is incredible defensively, and he's still an offensive player. Like, he's a good offensive player, and he's shown that he can, I don't want to say shoot, but he's shown that he at least has the initiative to try and shoot now. You see him doing it in warm-ups and stuff. Like, I realize that's not necessarily in the game, but at least he has the initiative. I think eventually he'll get there. It's never going to be great, but you look at it now, and it's not like great players in the NBA have to be able to shoot the 3 ball at a very high rate, to be good. So one reason I like the Rockets is they can go really small. Without Jarrett Allen, they don't really have a whole lot of options at center other than DeAndre Jordan. So I honestly could see them going small like the Rockets did last year. And basically just the difference between the Rockets last year and this year with the Nets is every single player that would be on the court would be able to shoot a 3. They only have 2 guys right now I'm not confident in from 3-point range, and that's DeAndre Jordan, who's a center, and Bruce Brown. I don't see those guys really making a ton of 3s, but they are, going to be pivotal pieces just because they're defensive players. But small ball could be really advantageous for the Nets. The Bucks are one of the few teams I could see upsetting the Nets in the East, just because Drew Holiday, obviously incredible wing defender for guards. Same with DiVincenzo, although DiVincenzo is obviously a little bit more underrated. I think he's an incredible defender. He's chippy. He can play very physical, I guess. And they also have Giannis to guard Kevin Durant. There are very few guys that can guard Kevin Durant, but even Drew Holiday's guarded him before in the playoffs and done a fine job. So I think the Bucks are the one team that could potentially upset them. But even then, if Kyrie stays, which I am obviously hoping he will. I want to see that team play together. It'd be super entertaining. Then they'll all be able to create their own shots at like an incredibly elite level. I think that'll be the first time ever because like you look at these, basically super teams that have been assembled in the past, and you see Dwayne Wade, Chris Bosh, LeBron James. You look at that team. Not all those guys can like create their own shot in like an incredible way. Like you don't see them pulling up from like super deep from three off like step backs. LeBron James is incredible because he's a great defender, great at driving, great offensive player. He's also a great passer. He's not the same player as these other guys when it comes to shot creation. And now the Rockets side of it, 8 picks is a lot, and 8 years is a lot. Now the reason I think the Rockets did this is because if you look at it this last offseason, Daryl Morey was let go from the Rockets, and they picked up Raphael Stone. Now, if you're a general manager, typically you kind of want to have your own team. Your team needs to have its own identity. And I think that this is why he took this trade potentially instead of the Ben Simmons trade. He has the opportunity basically to create a team basically to exactly like the needs and things that he thinks should be on a good basketball team. He has the ability to do anything with the draft capital he has. He still has decent players at his disposal, so he can really go any way with this. And it's basically just a GM's dream because you have so much draft capital. You can draft all these great players, but you can also have the ability to make trades to acquire players that you think would fit well on the roster. So I think that's a big reason they did it. And if worse comes to worst, this team doesn't perform well in the playoffs or even misses the playoffs, Victor Oladipo is on an expiring contract, so they are not required to pay him or re-sign him, which is another reason I think they might have gone Oladipo instead of LeVert. And so it's so weird to me that the Rockets, this team that had given up, basically it felt like their future to a degree when trading for Russell Westbrook and then Chris Paul, and just felt to me like they had 3 or 4 trades and I'm just like, wow, that is not good. And they basically just got all that draft capital back. I think there was a 3-year period that they have where they didn't have their own first round pick coming up, so they got their picks now. And I really like the attitude, honestly, that the Rockets kind of have right now. Like, they were not scared to call out James Harden, John Wall, and DeMarcus Cousins weren't. They have an attitude, I think, of like toughness and resiliency. Even in adding Oladipo, I think you have that. But the only thing I'm a little worried about is that other Rockets players on this team early in the season could have chosen sides between James Harden and, DeMarcus and Wall. That would really divide this team, especially if PJ Tucker and guys like that started basically just picking sides and dividing the team. So I wouldn't be shocked if they made more moves if that is the case. I don't think it is the case outside of, I think I heard a little bit about PJ Tucker, but I obviously think that he's going to try and compete at any level. Maybe he was just a little mad. But yeah, that's kind of all I had to say for the Rockets. Good on them for doing that. I know Raphael Stone's going to be super excited. I still think Ben Simmons is the player you should take in that scenario because he's proven, obviously, and it's not like he's very old. You can still build around him. I'm sure they would have gotten some draft capital. So the Pacers. I really like what the Pacers did, honestly. With the Pelicans being a small market team, I agree with basically everything they did. I know that a lot of fans of these other teams might see this and be like, Oladipo's the better player. And even that's arguable. I think Karis LeVert's an incredible young player. You just haven't seen him in a big enough role yet, other than these like couple game stretches. He's obviously great for those, but you haven't seen him do anything consistently. But, Oladipo's in that same boat kind of after that knee surgery, so it's not like he's like levels above Karis LeVert. They also get a 2nd round pick back, but what I like the most about this is that Karis is young, first of all, and if you're going to be, let's say, the Pacers in a small market team, it's really hard to attract free agents. And so I think the Pacers kind of have their core set with Brogdon and Sabonis. And then you also have, I know I've heard rumors about Miles Turner wanting to be out, but he's looked very good this season, honestly. They kind of have that core, and that's sort of like not necessarily the same age as a rookie, but like second contract type thing. So Karis LeVert fits in basically exactly with the timeline. And because it's going to be harder for them to get players of that caliber unless it's through trades, I think they did a very good job, honestly. And he's locked up for 3 more years, whereas Oladipo would have walked this offseason and requested a lot of money, which I'm sure they were unsure about whether or not they were going to pay it because, he is coming off that knee injury. And so I don't see a lot of downside in this trade for the Pacers. The only thing they get worse at is on the defensive side of the ball. I do think Oladipo is better, but Malcolm Brogdon's still a very good defensive guard. And even if LeVert doesn't necessarily work out, you have TJ Warren coming back, and you still have a young player under contract that you can trade. So if worse comes to worse and Karis doesn't look good on this team, which I think he'll look great, especially with, I'm not going to try and pronounce his name, but the Pacers head coach likes to shoot a lot of threes. Karis is a very good three-point shooter. The other night, he basically just torched the Grizzlies. I mean, he has little spurts like that, so he can take over games. So I actually think that was a very, very good trade for the Pacers. So the Cavaliers, this is probably the most underrated team in this trade just because so many other teams got very, very big-name players. But I think Jared Allen is a very, very good player and a very, very good center at that. And he's also young. So the Cavaliers right now have Colin Sexton and Darius Garland. They're two basically young stars. I don't know if you would label them as stars, or even I would, but that's what Cavs fans and the Cavs basically organization thinks, that they did draft them to be stars. And so they get another player in that same age range that they can maintain for a long time, who's very good on the defensive side of the ball, which I know Garland is not. I would say Sexton is just because of how basically aggressive he is, but at the same time, he's only 6'3". And the issue with this for the Cavs is right now they have JaVale McGee, Andre Drummond, and Kevin Love, as well as Larry Nance. And so all of those guys are pretty good bigs. I don't think there's a single one of those that's pretty awful. But I don't see the downside in this trade. I realize that they lost a Milwaukee Bucks pick for next season, but you don't want to bank on Giannis getting hurt to get a pick. And obviously I really hope he doesn't, but I don't think that would be a very high pick. It'd definitely be out of the lottery unless something drastic happens to the Bucks organization or roster. So I think the Cavs honestly did a really good job. And I think that this upcoming season, I think that Drummond will honestly probably walk in free agency. I've actually really, really liked him on this team. But Jared Allen has very good upside offensively and has looked like a very, very established and good defender. I mean, he's done it throughout his whole career. So kind of my winners and losers of the trade. I know I've talked about it a little bit. I'm coming back. I talked about the winners and losers, and I just talked for too long. You guys don't want to see a 30-minute video. I don't want to have to edit a 30-minute video. I think the Rockets come out of this as Raphael Stone is a winner in this scenario. He has all the draft capital in the world. He can let Victor Oladipo walk. He can basically do whatever he wants with this roster. He has total control of tons of assets. The Nets get an incredible player in James Harden, but you have 3 guys on this team who have all had issues with previous teams, whether it's Kevin Durant with the Warriors and Draymond Green, James Harden with Houston recently, and then Kyrie Irving in Boston. Even the last 2 years, Kyrie Irving has had issues with Steve Nash as the head coach, and he feels like he should have been better represented. We don't know if he's going to play again this year. Obviously, tons of issues, but the ceiling is so high for the Brooklyn Nets that I think it was worth it. So you could argue that they're winners. I honestly think a lot of these teams are winners. The Pacers picked up Karis LeVert, definitely a winner in my opinion. As I mentioned, they get younger, which they didn't necessarily need, but at least he fits the timeline now. Victor Oladipo could have easily walked this offseason. Karis LeVert's locked up for 3 more years. They're a small market. I don't think Oladipo would have even wanted to come back unless he gets a ton of money. And LeVert's basically locked up in Indiana for the next 3 years. The Cavs. Jared Allen's an incredible defensive player. I think that he's going to mesh really well with Garland and Sexton. And to add to that, those are your 2 basically building blocks. You just add a 3rd building block that's basically the same exact age. So honestly, I don't really see any losers in this scenario outside of, I think, the Rockets, who could have had Ben Simmons. But I'm not saying the Rockets as a team won this. I think Raphael Stone won. And the Nets, it's just a good trade all around. I don't see these teams being disappointed at the end of this season. I could see the Nets being disappointed at the end of these 8 years of picks. But I think this season, this trade works out for everybody. So thanks so much for watching. Hope you have a good one. I've been talking for way too long now, but thanks.